The slave market on Station 9 smelled like fear and rust. It was a massive floating structure in the cold darkness of space, far from any planet that cared about laws or justice. Thousands of beings passed through its metal corridors every single day. Most of them came to buy, some came to sell, and some, the unlucky ones, came in chains. Was one of the unlucky ones. She was a species known for their pale blue skin and silver eyes. She was young, barely 20 cycles old by her people's counting, which made her almost the same as a 20-year-old human woman. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her arms were covered in bruises from the guards who had handled her roughly. Her silver eyes, once bright with hope and curiosity, were now dull with exhaustion and grief. But did not care about her own pain. She did not care about her own fear. All she cared about was the tiny figure she held tightly against her chest. Was her little sister. She was only 3 cycles old, just a baby by any species standards. She had the same pale blue skin as, but her eyes were different. They were violet, like the flowers that used to grow in the gardens of their home. Those violet eyes were too young to understand what was happening. They still held innocence. They still held trust. And every time looked into them, her heart broke a little more. 6 months ago, their world had been a peaceful place. They were not warriors. They were artists and musicians and dreamers. They built beautiful cities of white stone and spent their evenings watching the 3 moons rise over quiet oceans. Remembered running through the streets of their capital city with on her shoulders, both of them laughing as the evening breeze carried the smell of blooming flowers. Then the Dominion came. The Dominion was a coalition of species that believed in one simple idea: the strong should rule the weak. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, conquering world after world, taking what they wanted and destroying what they did not need. They had nothing to offer them except slaves. The invasion lasted 3 days. The bombardment from space destroyed the cities. The ground troops killed anyone who resisted. Parents had tried to hide with their daughters in the basement of their home. A Dominion soldier found them on the 2nd day. He killed their father first, then their mother. He would have killed in 2, but a call came through his communicator ordering all troops to move to the next sector. He left them there among the bodies of their parents. Did not remember much about the days that followed. She remembered carrying through burning streets. She remembered hiding in ruins and eating whatever scraps she could find. She remembered making it to a refugee station on the edge of the system, thinking they were finally safe. The slavers caught them at that station. They had been waiting there like predators at a watering hole, knowing that desperate refugees would come, had fought them. She had scratched and bitten and screamed, but she was small and weak and exhausted, and they were many and strong. They put chains on her wrists and threw her into a transport ship with dozens of other captives. Now she was here, on Station 9, kneeling on the cold metal floor of a holding pen, waiting to be sold like an animal. The holding pen was a large cage in the middle of the market square. There were about 30 captives inside, all different species, all wearing the same expression of hopeless despair. Some of them had been slaves for years. Others, were new to this horror. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say. Stirred in arms and made a small sound of discomfort. Immediately began to rock her gently, humming a lullaby that their mother used to sing. It was a song about stars and dreams and a world where everyone was safe. Did not believe in that world anymore, but the song seemed to comfort, so she kept humming. The auction master appeared at the edge of the square. His name was, and he was a species known for their massive size and brutal nature. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with gray skin like stone and 2 tusks jutting from his lower jaw. His eyes were small and cruel, and they swept over the captives with the cold calculation of a merchant evaluating livestock. Walked slowly along the row of cages, stopping occasionally to examine a particular captive more closely. Sometimes he would grab a face and turn it from side to side. Sometimes he would make notes on a small device he carried. His guards followed behind him, armored soldiers with weapons ready, watching for any sign of trouble. When reached the cage, he stopped, his small eyes fixed on the child in her arms, and a slow smile spread across his ugly face. His blood turned to ice. She knew that smile. She had seen it on the faces of other slavers during the transport. It was the smile of someone who had found something valuable, something that would bring a high price. Opened the cage door and stepped inside. The other captives shrank away from him, pressing themselves against the far wall. Wanted to run too, but there was nowhere to go. She could only hold and pray to gods she no longer believed in. The auction master stopped in front of her and looked down. His shadow fell over her like a death sentence. "The child," he said. His voice was like gravel scraping against metal. "How old?" Did not answer. She could not make her voice work. Reached down and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "I asked you a question, slave. How old is the child?" "3," whispered. "She is only 3. Something flickered in his eyes. It was not pity, did not feel pity. It was greed, pure, hungry greed. "Perfect," he said. "The syndicate will pay well for this one. They prefer them young, easier to train." Did not know exactly what the syndicate was, but she had heard whispers during the transport. They were a criminal organization that specialized in the worst kinds of trade. Children taken by the syndicate were never seen again. They disappeared into a darkness from which there was no return. "No," said. The word came out small and weak, but she said it again, louder this time. "No, please, you cannot take her. She is just a baby." Laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks tumbling down a mountain. "I can do whatever I want, slave. You belong to me now, both of you, and I will sell you to whoever pays the most." He turned to his guards and gestured toward. "Separate them. Put the child in the premium holding area. The auction for her begins tomorrow." The guards moved forward. Screamed. She screamed with everything she had, all the grief and rage and terror that had been building inside her for 6 months pouring out in one desperate sound. She kicked at the guards and tried to bite their hands when they reached for, but they were too strong. They grabbed her arms and began to pull. "No," sobbed, holding onto her sister with all her strength. "Please, she is only 3. Do not take her, please, I am begging you. She is only 3. But no one listened. No one cared. In the slave market of Station 9, begging meant nothing. The guards pulled harder and felt her grip beginning to slip. And then a voice cut through the chaos of the market. "Let them go." Everyone stopped. Everyone turned to look. A human was walking toward them through the crowd. Jack had never planned to be a hero. He was just a cargo hauler from Earth, a man who made his living moving freight from one star system to another. He was 42 years old, with a face that showed every year of hard work and long journeys through space. His hair was turning gray at the temples. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of loading and unloading cargo. He wore simple clothes, a worn jacket and sturdy boots, the kind of outfit that said he was nobody special. His ship was called the Dawn Chaser. It was an old vessel, almost as old as Jack himself, held together by constant repairs and stubborn determination. He had been flying the Dawn Chaser for 15 years, ever since he bought it with every credit he had saved during his time in the Earth Defense Fleet. It was not fast or fancy, but it was his, and it had given him a good life. 3 days ago, the Dawn Chaser had suffered an engine malfunction in the middle of nowhere. The main thruster had blown out, leaving Jack drifting through empty space with limited options. The nearest port for repairs was Station 9, a place Jack had heard about but never visited. He knew its reputation. Everyone in this part of the galaxy knew. It was a lawless station, controlled by criminals and slavers, where the rules of the Galactic Compact meant nothing. Jack had not wanted to come here, but he had no choice. Without repairs, he would die in the cold darkness between the stars. So he had limped his damaged ship into the station's docking bay and tried to keep his head down while waiting for the work to be finished. He had spent most of those 3 days in his ship or in a small repair shop owned by an old mechanic named Ben. Ben was a human too, one of the few on the station, and he had warned Jack to stay away from the market district. "Nothing good happens there," Ben had said, his weathered face grim. "Just finish your repairs and get out. Do not get involved in anything. These people will kill you for looking at them wrong." Jack had intended to follow that advice. He really had. But then he heard the screaming. He had been walking back from a supply shop, carrying a bag of food rations when the sound reached his ears. It was a woman's voice, high and desperate, cutting through the normal noise of the station like a knife. Jack stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the corridor, listening, while dozens of other beings walked past him without even slowing down. The screaming continued. It was coming from the market district. Jack knew he should turn around. He knew he should go back to his ship and wait for his repairs and leave this terrible place forever. That was the smart thing to do. That was the safe thing to do. But Jack had a daughter. Her name was Emma, and she was 20 years old now, a grown woman studying medicine back on Earth. Jack had not seen her in person for almost 2 years, though they spoke through video calls whenever he was in range of a communication relay. She had her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she was the best thing Jack had ever done with his life. He remembered when Emma was 3 years old. He remembered how small she had been, how fragile, how completely dependent on him and her mother for everything. He remembered holding her in his arms and feeling a love so powerful it scared him. He remembered promising himself that he would always protect her, that he would never let anyone hurt her. Every child, Jack had always believed, deserved someone who would make that promise. He started walking toward the screaming. The market district was worse than Jack had imagined. It was a large open space filled with cages and platforms and crowds of beings who had come to buy and sell living people. The smell was terrible, a mix of fear and sweat, and something else Jack did not want to identify. The noise was a constant roar of voices shouting prices and making deals, treating people like objects. Jack pushed through the crowd, following the sound of the screaming until he reached the center of the square. He saw a young alien woman with blue skin and silver eyes. She was on the ground, fighting against 2 armored guards who were trying to take a small child from her arms. The child was crying too, a high, thin wail of terror that pierced Jack's heart like a needle. "Please," the alien woman was sobbing, her voice raw with desperation. "She is only 3. Do not take her, please. I will do anything. Take me instead. Take only me. Just do not take her. She is only 3. She is just a baby." A massive alien with gray skin and tusks stood watching the scene with a cruel smile. He was obviously the one in charge, the one who had ordered this horror. He looked amused by the woman's suffering, like it was entertainment. The crowd around Jack watched too. Some of them looked bored. Some of them looked hungry, like they were enjoying the show. A few laughed at the woman's desperate pleas. None of them did anything to help. Jack felt something change inside him. He had been angry before in his life. He had been angry during the war, when humanity had fought for its survival against an alien species that wanted to exterminate them. He had been angry when his wife got sick and the doctors said there was nothing they could do. He had been angry many times. But this was different. This was a cold anger, a quiet anger, the kind that did not burn hot and fast but settled into his bones like ice. This was the anger of a man who had seen something evil and decided he could not look away. He started walking forward. The crowd parted around him without him even needing to push. Something in his face made them step aside. Something in his eyes told them this human was not going to be stopped. Jack reached the edge of the scene and stopped. He looked at the guards. He looked at the auction master. He looked at the young woman on the ground, still holding her sister with desperate strength. "Let them go." His voice was not loud. He did not shout. but somehow the words carried across the entire square, cutting through the noise like a blade through cloth. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Everyone turned to look at him. The massive auction master turned too, his small, cruel eyes finding Jack in the crowd. He looked the human up and down, taking in his simple clothes and ordinary appearance, and a slow smile spread across his ugly face. "A human," he said, and his voice dripped with contempt. "I have heard about your kind, soft little creatures from a soft little planet. You think because you survived one war against you are warriors now. You are nothing." Jack did not react to the insults. He kept his eyes fixed on the auction master's face. "I said let them go." The laughed. It was an ugly sound that echoed off the metal walls of the market. "Or what, human? What will you do? There are 50 armed guards in this square. You have nothing. You are nothing. Go back to your ship before I decide to add you to my inventory." Jack felt the weight of every eye in the market on him. He felt the fear trying to creep into his heart, telling him to run, to save himself, to forget what he had seen here. But then he looked at the little girl with the violet eyes, still crying in her sister's arms. She reminded him of Emma. "How much?" Jack asked. The auction master's smile faltered. "What?" "How much for both of them? The woman and the child. Give me a price." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the other captives had stopped moving, watching this strange confrontation with wide eyes. They stared at Jack for a long moment, his small eyes calculating. Then he smiled again, a different kind of smile this time. The smile of a merchant who had found an opportunity. "You want to buy them," he said. "Interesting, very interesting. Come then, human, let us discuss terms." He turned and walked toward a raised platform at the edge of the square. Jack followed, his heart pounding but his face calm. Behind him, watched the human walk away, not understanding what was happening but feeling, for the first time in 6 months, something she had thought was dead forever. Hoping. The platform at the edge of the square was where the auction master conducted his private business. It was raised above the crowd, giving anyone who stood there a clear view of the entire market. Climbed the steps with the easy confidence of someone who owned everything he could see. Jack followed behind him, very aware of the armed guards positioning themselves around the platform. The crowd below had not returned to normal. They were still watching, still silent, curious to see how this strange scene would play out. Was still on the ground with her sister in her arms, but the guards had stepped back, waiting for new orders. Her silver eyes never left the human who had spoken in her defense. Turned to face Jack when they reached the top of the platform. Up close, there was even more massive, nearly twice Jack's height and probably 5 times his weight. His gray skin looked like it was made of stone, and the tusks jutting from his lower jaw were yellow with age and stained with things Jack did not want to think about. "So," said, his voice rumbling like thunder in a distant valley, "a human wants to buy slaves. This is unusual. Your species has a reputation for being soft about such things." "I am not buying slaves," Jack said quietly. "I am buying their freedom." Laughed again, that horrible grinding sound. "Freedom, such a human word. There is no freedom in this universe, little creature. There is only power and weakness. Those with power take what they want. Those without power serve. This is the natural order of things." "Maybe in your universe," Jack said, "not in mine." The eyes narrowed slightly, studying Jack with new interest. "You are either very brave or very stupid. I have not decided which, but it does not matter. You want the female and the child. Fine. Let us talk about price." He pulled out a small device and tapped at it, bringing up information on a glowing screen. "The adult female is young and healthy. She would bring perhaps 8,000 credits at auction. The child is more valuable. Young ones always are, especially for certain buyers. She would bring 15,000, maybe 20 if the bidding goes well." Jack felt sick at hearing people talked about like merchandise, but he kept his face blank. So around 25,000 for both. That would be the auction price, yes, agreed. But you want to skip the auction. You want them now before anyone else has a chance to bid. For that convenience, you pay a premium, 40,000 credits. It was a massive sum, more than Jack usually made in 2 years of hauling cargo, but it was not everything he had. He hesitated and noticed. Ah, the said, his smile returning. I see, you do have the money, good, 40,000 and they are yours. Wait, Jack said. His mind was racing. Something was wrong here. The auction master had given in too easily. You said the child was already promised to someone, the syndicate. You mentioned them before. Smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that Jack almost missed it. But it was enough. The syndicate, Jack continued. They have already paid a deposit, have they not? If you sell the child to me, they will not be happy. The crowd below had gone even quieter, if that was possible. Everyone knew the syndicate. Everyone feared them. They were one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the outer territories, and they did not forgive those who broke agreements with them. His expression hardened. You are smarter than you look, human. Yes, the syndicate has paid a deposit of 10,000 credits for the child. If I sell her to you, I must return their money and explain why I broke our agreement. They may accept my explanation. They may not. Either way, it is a risk. How much to cover the risk? Jack asked. There was silence for a moment, calculating. Then he smiled, and this time the smile was pure greed. 50,000 credits, for both the woman and the child and my trouble with the syndicate. That is my final price. 50,000 credits. It was everything Jack had. Every credit he had saved over 15 years of hauling freight. Every credit he had put aside for retirement, for medical emergencies, for the rainy days that everyone knew were coming. If he paid this price, he would have nothing left. He would be starting over from zero at 42 years old. Jack thought about his wife back on Earth. She had always supported his work, had always understood that the freedom of space was something he needed, but she had also been counting on that money for their future. They had plans, dreams, a little house somewhere quiet where they could grow old together. He thought about Emma studying to be a doctor. She had worked so hard to get into medical school, and Jack had been so proud of her. He had promised to help with her student loans when she graduated. How could he do that now? He thought about his ship, the Dawn Chaser. Without money for fuel and repairs, how long could he keep flying? How long before he lost everything? And then he looked down at the market below, at the young alien woman with blue skin and silver eyes, still holding her baby sister against her chest, still trembling with fear. He looked at the little girl with violet eyes who did not understand why the universe was so cruel. Some decisions, Jack realized, were not really decisions at all. Some choices made themselves the moment you saw what was right and what was wrong. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a credit chip. It was a small plastic rectangle, no bigger than a playing card, but it held everything he owned. He had carried it with him for years, watching the numbers grow slowly, dreaming of the day when he would finally have enough. 50,000, Jack said, holding up the chip. Everything on this chip, check it if you want. Took the chip and slotted it into his device. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the balance, and his smile became genuine for the first time. 50,000 credits was a fortune, even for someone who dealt in lives. The transfer will take a moment, the said, tapping at his device. You are an interesting human, throwing away everything you have for two creatures you have never met. Your species is even stranger than I thought. Maybe, Jack said, or maybe your species has just forgotten what some things are worth. Laughed, but there was something different in the sound now, almost like respect. Perhaps, perhaps. He completed the transfer and handed back the empty chip. The transaction is done. They belong to you now. Take them and leave my station before I change my mind. Jack took the chip and put it back in his jacket. It felt lighter somehow, which was strange because it weighed exactly the same as before. But the number on it had changed from everything to nothing, and Jack felt that difference in his soul. He walked down the steps of the platform, past the guards who watched him with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt. He walked across the market square, past the cages full of captives who stared at him with desperate hope in their eyes, hope that he knew he could not fulfill. He had given everything for two strangers. He had nothing left to give. He stopped in front of who was still on the ground, still holding. The young woman looked up at him with silver eyes full of tears. "Come with me," Jack said, offering her his hand. "You are free now, both of you." Took his hand. Her grip was weak and trembling, but she held on like she was holding onto life itself. Jack helped her to her feet, and together they walked out of the slave market, leaving the cages and the chains and the cruelty behind. The crowd parted to let them pass. No one tried to stop them. No one said a word. Behind them, watched from his platform, still holding his device, still looking at the record of a transaction that made no sense to him at all. 50,000 credits for two worthless slaves. Humans, he thought, were the strangest creatures in the entire galaxy. The corridors of Station 9 seemed different now. They were the same grimy metal walls, the same flickering lights, the same crowds of beings going about their business. But something had changed. Or maybe it was just Jack who had changed. He walked through the station with beside him and Little in her arms, and everything felt sharper, clearer, more real than it had before. Had not spoken since they left the market. She walked like someone in a dream, her silver eyes wide and unfocused, her body moving on autopilot while her mind tried to process what had happened. She kept looking at Jack, quick sideways glances, like she was waiting for him to reveal the trick, to explain that this was all some cruel joke. Had stopped crying. The little girl with violet eyes was watching everything around her with the curiosity of childhood, her tiny blue fingers clutching the torn fabric of her sister's shirt. She did not understand what had happened. She did not understand that she had been saved. She only knew that her sister was still holding her, and that was enough. They reached the docking bay where the Dawn Chaser was berthed. The ship looked old and tired, its hull by years of travel through the rougher parts of space. But to Jack, it had never looked more beautiful. It was home. It was safety. It was the one thing he had left in the universe. Ben was waiting by the loading ramp. The old mechanic had been working on the Dawn Chaser's engine for the past 3 days, replacing the blown thruster with parts scavenged from half a dozen other ships. He was a grizzled man in his 60s, with a bald head and hands permanently stained with engine grease, and he had been flying ships since before Jack was born. His eyebrows shot up when he saw Jack approaching with his 2 companions. "Jack," Ben said slowly, his eyes moving from the alien woman to the child to Jack's face. "What in the name of all that is holy did you do?" "Something stupid," Jack admitted. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp and looked at his old friend. "And something right." Ben stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head and stepped aside. "Get them inside. The engine repairs are done. We can leave whenever you are ready." Jack nodded and led up the ramp into the ship. The interior of the Dawn Chaser was small and cramped, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. There was a cockpit at the front, a tiny living area in the middle, a cramped bathroom, and a cargo hold in the back. It was not much, but it was clean and warm and safe. Stopped just inside the door, looking around with something like wonder in her eyes. After months in cages and holding pens and transport ships, even this modest space must have seemed like a palace. "You can sit anywhere," Jack said, gesturing toward a small couch bolted to the floor. "Are you hungry? I have food. It is nothing fancy, just rations, but it is better than nothing." Sat down slowly, still holding. The little girl immediately started squirming, wanting to explore this new environment. After a moment's hesitation, let her down. Toddled across the floor with the unsteady gait of a 3-year-old, touching everything she could reach, making small sounds of excitement. Why? Asked. Her voice was hoarse from screaming, barely more than a whisper. Why did you do this? You do not know us. You have never seen us before today. You gave everything you had for strangers. Jack sat down across from her on a metal crate. He watched exploring the ship, her violet eyes bright with curiosity, and he felt something warm settle in his chest. I could not just stand there, he said simply. I could not watch and do nothing. But your credits, your money, how will you live? How will you survive? I will figure it out. I always do. Jack leaned back against the wall and sighed. Besides, some things are more important than money. Stared at him like he was speaking a language she did not understand. In her experience, in the experience of most species in the galaxy, money was everything. Power was everything. Survival was everything. The idea that someone would give up all three for strangers was so alien to her that she could not even comprehend it. Where will you take us? She asked finally. What will happen to us now? Jack had been thinking about this question since they left the market. He did not have many options. Without money, he could not afford fuel for long journeys. He could not afford docking fees at most stations. He could barely afford to eat. But there was one place he could still go. One place that would not turn him away, no matter how broke he was. Earth, he said. My home planet. It is far from here, almost on the other side of the galaxy, but I have enough fuel to get there if we fly direct. It is not a perfect place, but it is safe. You can build a new life there if you want. Earth, repeated. She had heard of humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of them. They were a young species, only spacefaring for about 200 years, but they had made a name for themselves during the war. A species that refused to surrender, that fought against impossible odds, that somehow won when everyone expected them to lose. I have heard stories about your world. Do not believe everything you hear, Jack said with a small smile. We are not as special as some people think, just stubborn. Ben appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. Engine is ready. We can leave whenever you want. Thanks, Ben. Jack stood up. Are you coming with us? The old mechanic shook his head. My ship is here. My life is here such as it is. But you should leave soon, Jack. Word travels fast on this station. The syndicate will hear about what you did and they will not be happy. Jack nodded. He had known this moment was coming. What about you? Will they cause trouble for you? Maybe, probably, Ben shrugged. But I am too old and too ugly to worry about that now. Just get those girls to safety. That is what matters. Jack clasped the old man's hand in a firm grip. Thank you for everything. Thank me by not getting killed. Ben turned and walked down the ramp without looking back. Jack closed the ramp behind him and made his way to the cockpit. It was a small space, barely big enough for 2 seats, filled with control panels and displays and switches. He had spent thousands of hours in this chair, guiding the Dawn Chaser through asteroid fields and nebulae and the empty darkness between stars. But this journey felt different. This journey had meaning beyond just profit and survival. He started the engine, feeling the ship come alive around him, the familiar hum of power flowing through the hull. Outside the viewport, he could see the docking bay, the metal walls of the station, the other ships waiting for departure clearance. Appeared in the doorway of the cockpit in her arms again. May we watch? She asked hesitantly. Of course, Jack gestured to the co-pilot's seat. Strap in. It might get a little bumpy until we clear the station. Sat down and held on her lap, her arms wrapped protectively around the little girl. Violet eyes went wide as the ship began to move, as the station fell away behind them, as the stars spread out before them like an endless field of diamonds. Is that where we are going? Asked, pointing at the stars. It was the first time she had spoken since Jack met her, and her voice was high and sweet and full of wonder. Yes, Jack said softly, that is where we are going, home. The Dawn Chaser accelerated into the darkness, leaving Station 9 behind forever. carrying 3 souls toward an uncertain future that somehow felt brighter than anything Jack had known in years. The journey to Earth took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of traveling through the cold darkness of space, of rationing food and conserving fuel, of watching the stars slowly change position as they crossed from one arm of the galaxy to another. 6 weeks of 3 strangers learning to share a tiny ship, learning each other's stories, learning to trust. Jack told about his life on Earth. He told her about his wife, who had stood by him through 20 years of marriage, through good times and bad, through long absences and difficult reunions. He told her about Emma, his daughter, who was studying to be a doctor because she wanted to help people, because she had her father's stubborn determination to make the universe a little better than she found it. Told Jack about her world. She told him about the white stone cities and the 3 moons and the gardens where flowers bloomed in every color imaginable. She told him about her parents, who had been artists, who had filled their home with paintings and sculptures and music. She told him about the day the Dominion came, about the fire and the death and the running. She cried when she told that part, and Jack sat with her in silence, offering nothing but his presence, knowing that sometimes presence was enough. Grew more comfortable with each passing day. At first she had been quiet and withdrawn, hiding behind her sister whenever Jack came near. But children are resilient in ways that adults often forget, and slowly she began to open up. She started asking questions about everything she saw. She started laughing at the strange sounds the ship made. She started calling Jack by name, her little voice struggling with the unfamiliar syllables until it came out sounding like Yak instead of Jack. He never corrected her. On the 42nd day, they entered Earth's solar system. Was in the cockpit when the blue planet came into view. She had seen images of Earth before, in news broadcasts and educational programs, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. It was beautiful. A sphere of blue and white and green, hanging in the darkness like a precious jewel, so alive and vibrant compared to the dead stations and empty space she had grown used to. "This is your home," she said softly. "This is my home," Jack agreed. "And now if you want it can be yours too." The Dawn Chaser descended through the atmosphere and landed at the new Houston spaceport. It was a busy place, full of ships coming and going, full of people from a dozen different worlds moving about their business. But Jack only had eyes for one person. Was waiting at the edge of the landing field. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling and worrying. She wore a simple dress and no makeup, and to Jack she was the most beautiful woman in the universe. He had called ahead, of course. As soon as they had entered communication range, he had sent a message explaining everything. He had told her about the market and the auction and the price he had paid. He had told her that their retirement fund was gone, that their plans for the future had changed, that he was coming home with 2 refugees who had nowhere else to go. Her reply had been brief: "Come home, we will figure it out together." Jack walked down the ramp with and beside him. He felt nervous in a way he had not felt in years, uncertain of what reception they would receive. Had said the right words, but words were easy. The reality of 2 alien strangers moving into your life was something else entirely. He should not have worried. Walked across the landing field and wrapped her arms around all 3 of them. It was an awkward embrace, 4 people who barely fit together, but somehow it worked. Somehow it felt right. "Welcome home," said her voice thick with emotion. "All of you." The story of what Jack had done spread quickly. It started with the people at the spaceport, who overheard the story and told their friends. It spread to the local news networks, who picked it up and broadcast it across the planet. It reached the global media, then the interstellar networks, then the halls of power where diplomats and politicians discussed the future of the galaxy. A human cargo hauler had spent his entire savings to free 2 alien slaves. It seemed like such a small thing in the grand scheme of the universe. 1 man, 2 lives, 50,000 credits. What did it matter? But it mattered more than anyone could have predicted. Other humans started hearing the story. Cargo pilots like Jack, who traveled the outer territories and saw the slave markets with their own eyes. Traders who did business on lawless stations and felt sick every time they walked past the cages. Tourists who had looked away before but could no longer ignore what they had seen. Soldiers who had fought in the war and remembered what it meant to fight for something greater than yourself. They started doing what Jack had done. One by one at first, then in groups, then in waves. They pooled their resources. They formed networks. They built safe houses on a dozen worlds, places where freed slaves could go to start new lives. They called themselves the abolitionist movement, and within a year it had become the largest humanitarian effort in galactic history. The other species watched in bewilderment. Humans were not the strongest creatures in the galaxy. They were not the or the most advanced or the longest lived. They were fragile, short-lived, prone to disease and injury. By any objective measure, they should have been minor players in the cosmic order, easily ignored and easily forgotten. But they had something else, something that seemed uniquely abundant in their soft, breakable hearts. They had the inability to look away from suffering. They had the stubborn refusal to accept that cruelty was just the way things were. Became a spokesperson for the movement. She traveled to 100 worlds, telling her story, pleading for support, building alliances with species who had never thought much about humans before. Her sister grew up on Earth, learned to speak English with a Texas accent, and eventually went to medical school just like Emma. 5 years after Jack bought their freedom, stood before the Galactic Council. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size and color, all watching as this young woman took the podium. She told them about her world. She told them about the invasion and the loss and the slave market on Station 9. She told them about a tired human freight runner who had given everything he had for 2 strangers he had never met. When she finished, a delegate from the ancient collective raised a thin silver appendage to ask a question. Why do you think the humans help you? What do they gain from this? What is their purpose? Smiled. She thought of Jack, who was back on Earth now, flying cargo again in a new ship that the movement had bought for him. She thought of, who had welcomed her into their family without hesitation. She thought of Little, who no longer remembered the cages and the chains, who only remembered being loved. They gain nothing, said. That is the point. They do not help because they want something in return. They help because they cannot stand to see innocence destroyed. They help because somewhere in their strange, soft hearts, they believe that every child, no matter what world they come from, deserves to be safe. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of the galaxy. That is humanity's gift to the universe. Not strength, not technology, not power, just the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that cruelty must be tolerated, and I believe with all my heart that we are all better for it. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then slowly the delegates began to applaud. And somewhere in the crowd, watching from a visitor's gallery, Jack wiped a tear from his eye and smiled.